Joel Wallach, and I want to talk about diabetes today. Diabetes is a terrible degenerative disease that afflicts something like 12% of Americans, and the rate is actually growing. It's an epidemic disease in America right now. We have 1 million new cases of adult-onset type 2 diabetes. It gives us about 32 million diabetics in America, of which 31 million are adult-onset type 2 diabetics. And it's not an insulin problem. Adult-onset type 2 diabetes is actually a simple mineral deficiency disease. We learned in 1957 that we could prevent and cure. We could actually prevent and cure adult-onset type 2 diabetes in laboratory animals, pet animals, and farm animals by supplementing properly with these minerals and their cofactors. This lay dormant in human beings for 20 years. Some 20 years later, 1977, it was actually proven again in human beings that these minerals, these trace minerals and their cofactors, could in fact support normal and healthy blood sugar levels, and people could wean off their insulin, go back to fairly normal lives. And that was kind of an exciting thing, but that was in 1977, and nothing has really happened new in the science of diabetes. And when you look at the reason why, according to the GAO, the General Accounting Office, which is the budget watchdog for the U.S. Congress, they say that the average diabetic, if they are treated by their physician in the standard medical way, they are worth to their physician over the 24 to 40 years they live after diagnosis, they're worth $750,000. If the doctor gives a nutritional counseling to the patient that has adult-onset type 2 diabetes, what happens is they get an extra $30 for an extended office visit tacked onto their $50 office visit, and so $30 compared with $750,000 is not exciting. Well, when you look at the blood levels of these minerals since 1948 through the modern times, through the 21st century, these blood levels of these minerals have dropped like a rock. They've dropped from 1,000 parts per million down to 0.13 parts per million since 1948. And the amount of carbohydrates that the average American eats has gone up considerably. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 100 years ago, the average Americans ate about a pound of sugar per person per year. A pound of sugar per person per year. Today, 100 years later, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the average American is eating 157 pounds of sugar per person per year. Now you're looking at a half a pound a day compared to a half a pound to a pound a year 100 years ago. So the carbohydrate stream we have now is enormous. And this carbohydrate stream coming from all kinds of snack foods and more potatoes and more pasta and more noodles and more breads and more cereals and so on, plus the mineral deficiencies are the basic root cause of this epidemic, this true epidemic of the adult-onset type 2 diabetes. Another interesting fact about adult-onset type 2 diabetes is these people actually make more insulin, as much as 10 times more insulin as non-diabetics. Because they make lots of insulin, if the patient inquires of their doctor, say, hey, am I not making any insulin? If the doctor is honest, he'll say, well, yeah, you're making insulin, but you're insulin resistant. You're an insulin resistant diabetic. Well, you're insulin resistant because you're not taking in the mineral cofactors necessary for that insulin to work properly. You give yourself those minerals, the insulin starts working, blood sugar starts dropping, and magic things happen. Now, if there's anything good about being adult-onset type 2 diabetic, it's that the patient has been empowered by the medical doctor, their doctor, to test themselves on a daily basis. They've been empowered to adjust their own medication. They don't have to call in, they don't have to run in 4 times a day to test themselves or to get the doctor or the doctor's nurse to test them or to adjust their medication. The diabetic is taught how to do this themselves. So with a proper supplement program, you'll find that you can actually reduce the amount of insulin you're taking, and you'll be able to go back to a fairly normal life. And we've talked about this before, but I want to again bring up groups of people who are just really, really great control groups, if you want to use that term. If you look at the Amish in America, and they've been on the North American continent for 300 years, and they haven't changed much in the way they eat and the way they live and how their cultural activities go on. And the Amish, of course, have modern neighbors right on the other side of the fence in which they live. The Amish shun the use of automobiles and so forth, and trucks and tractors. They still use horses to power farm implements and carry their buggies around and so on. The Amish don't use electricity or propane or natural gas. The Amish still use wood as their primary fuel. And they have the byproduct of wood ashes. They still have the byproduct of wood ashes from heating and cooking. And they put these wood ashes into their gardens for their families, where they grow grains and vegetables and fruit and nuts. Now, they also mix these wood ashes with their food. It's called culinary ashes. And they also mix wood ashes with their salt, cut the salt with it, so they get these minerals from 3 sources: fertilizer in their garden, culinary ashes, and also ashes in which they use to cut their salt and other seasonings. Now, because of this, they're getting the minerals necessary for their insulin to work. And as a result, they only have about a 4% rate of diabetes and almost a 0 rate of obesity, compared with the general American population, which has a 12% rate of diabetes and right now a 31% rate of obesity, and is projected to be 40% of Americans will be obese by the year 2010. So it's very obvious. They're breathing the same air, drinking the same water, basically eating the same food, except that their food is fertilized with wood ashes, which are the minerals that are left over when you burn away the carbon in the wood. And I'm going to keep saying that over and over and over because it is so basically important to our health, especially in something like diabetes. When you look at the typical diet that's given to a diabetic in America or any other industrialized nation by their physician, they're told, look, eat these low glycemic grains, whole grains, eat the low glycemic fruit, such as bananas and apples, and stay away from the plums and the grapes and so on. They're only getting about 10% of the story. 90% of the story are these minerals that must be taken in to replace the ones they're not getting in their food anymore. They're not getting them in their food anymore because we're not using wood as a fuel. There's no ash byproduct. And again, the ashes are the minerals that are left over when you burn away the carbon and fuel. When you look at the Pima Indians in the United States and Mexico, they're the same genetic pool, and there's kind of a fenceless border between the Pima Indians and in Mexico and the Pima Indians in Arizona. It's a man-made line on a map. And so there's no difference in them genetically. There's no difference in them culturally. The only difference is the Pima Indians in America live in double-wide trailers. They have pickup trucks. They heat with propane, natural gas, or electricity, cook with natural gas, propane, or electricity. And the Pima Indians in Mexico still use wood as their primary fuel. And the Pima Indians in Arizona don't have access to the wood ashes. The Pima Indians in Mexico still do. And it's really amazing that this stuff happens. When you look at the history of people, when it comes to longevity and illness and what they look like, and you go back to pictographs of the Egyptians, and you look at 1890s and 1920s pictures of Native Americans, they were all slim. There was no obesity. And when you look at the records, of the military doctors and the early country doctors of people who would in fact take care of the Native American populations, they had little or no records of diabetes in these people, little or no records of obesity in these people. And that's because they were still mixing wood ashes into their corn to make their tortillas, or culinary ashes. They were still putting wood ashes into their gardens. And the wood ashes, again, are the minerals that are left over when you burn away the carbon of the wood. Now, why do we have so many young people today with adult onset type 2 diabetes? The name implies that adult onset type 2 diabetes actually occurred in people over the age of 50 or 60, and 50, 60 years ago, that's the way it was. Well, the picture has changed. Now, babies can be born with adult onset type 2 diabetes, meaning they make plenty of insulin, but they can't control their blood sugar with it because they don't have the minerals. They're deficient in the minerals necessary for the insulin to work properly. The mineral cofactor is necessary for the insulin to work properly. As a result, we now see adult onset type 2 diabetes in newborn babies. The rate is extremely high in teenagers and young adults. And that's because they are minerally deficient. They're living on carbonated drinks and carbohydrates, and nobody's supplementing with these minerals anymore. It's kind of interesting that the rate of diabetes, adult onset type 2 diabetes, in the poor population is much higher than it is in the wealthy population. Okay, and again, it comes down to the poor population drinks more carbonated drinks, more carbohydrates because they're cheaper, and there's a zero consciousness, almost a zero consciousness in the poor cultures when it comes to supplementing. They haven't had to think about it because they're supplementing almost unconsciously with these wood ashes from their cooking and heating fires into the gardens, into their food, culinary ashes, and cutting their salt with it. And so historically they did all these things because they had the byproduct of cooking with wood, but nobody paid attention to it when they made the shift to other fuels. Now, many doctors will want people to believe that there's a terrible black gene that causes the high rate of diabetes and obesity in the African American population in America and other industrialized nations. Well, that's not true, because they've shown very clearly with a great study where they went to Africa, Nigeria, and also in Great Britain. They showed that obesity and high blood pressure and diabetes is not genetic. It has to do with something else. It has to do with what they eat, what they don't eat, what they supplement with, what they don't supplement with. And so you're going to find that we could actually eliminate obesity and diabetes in industrialized nations. I believe we could eliminate obesity and diabetes in the industrialized nations in 90 days if everybody were to supplement properly and cut way back on their carbohydrate intakes. Now, it's impossible to cut back on carbohydrate and you're not supplementing with minerals. It is impossible to cut back on carbohydrates when you're not supplementing with minerals, because you will always have that pica and cribbing. You'll always have this almost psychotic desire to eat and snack. And of course, that's how we get animals in the feedlots to gain weight, is we consciously make them minerally deficient, and then give them a big stream of carbohydrates, and they will, in fact, get diabetes and become obese. Prime beef. Now, up until recent times, diabetes was a rare disease in pet animals because they had these complete animal foods, canned food, kind of like a meatloaf with everything in it, and dry foods with everything in it. But as animal proteins became more expensive, the manufacturers of animal foods, pet foods, switched to carbohydrates. And so if you look at the ingredients of a bag of dry food and canned dog food, most of the time you'll find that the first ingredient is rice or corn or wheat or other grains, and that either red meat or fish or chicken are kind of 8th or 10th or 12th down in the line of ingredients. Whereas in the old days, the first ingredient was red meat, liver, chicken, fish, and it was much easier to control the obesity and the diabetes in these animals, because they would actually supplement with the minerals that are necessary to prevent the diabetes and obesity. Well, they didn't keep up. As you switch to carbohydrates, you need to go up with those minerals, but they haven't upped the minerals, so the number of cases of diabetes and obesity in pet animals is going up at a significant rate because they've changed the basic formulation of animal foods. So as owners, we have to be alert to that and make sure we supplement the animals with these minerals to prevent them from getting diabetes. You know, it's an old adage that people and animals or pets kind of look alike. That's because we eat the same thing. Well, if you feed an animal the commercial diet solely without adding any snacks or table scraps to it and supplement properly, they will not get obesity or diabetes either. And so it's not that difficult. And I'm sure I don't know things that the doctors don't, because I get most of my material from medical journals. So I have to assume if they're reading the medical journals, they're getting the same materials I am. So the reason why they don't discuss nutrition and supplement programs for diabetes is not because it's not useful. It's not because it doesn't work. It's because the amount of profit they make from a 15-minute nutritional consultation is $30 compared with $750,000 by treating the diabetic in the standard way. They make their money from amputating toes and feet and legs. They make their money for dealing with the cardiovascular problems and the peripheral neuropathies and the blindness and all the other stuff that goes along classically with diabetes. These things are totally avoidable by supplementing properly. They're avoidable by supplementing properly. Enormous amount of research on this in every industrialized nation. Enormous amount has been published going back to 1957. 1957 is when this really was first recognized that adult onset type 2 diabetes is a mineral deficiency disease. Now, just as a little aside here, type 1 diabetes, or juvenile onset diabetes, is a different story. They do not make any insulin whatsoever. They don't make any insulin, zero insulin, so they could never wean off of insulin. However, by supplementing properly with the right minerals and their cofactors, and getting back on the carbohydrates and getting them to eat more protein and more vegetables, you can significantly reduce the amount of insulin necessary to manage their blood sugar and keep it down to where damage is not being caused to the eyes and the bones and the heart and cardiovascular system and the nerves and the bones and muscles and so forth. And so the need for amputations, the need for dealing with these complications of type 1 diabetes can be significantly reduced. I know people who are type 1 diabetics who are in their 60s and 70s, have no complications, or very, very few complications. The average lifespan of a type 1 diabetic, if they follow the standard medical system, is registered at 33. Well, I think the type 1 diabetics that I deal with from a supplement standpoint, the average lifespan is much greater. And I have to sit down and calculate that, but I'd venture to say that it's going to be in the 50s and 60s. So you can seriously gain 20 or 30 years of longevity if you're type 1 diabetic by paying attention to how much carbohydrate you consume, cut way back on that, zero sugar, and you want to supplement properly. Make sure you're getting those minerals that are necessary for the insulin you're giving yourself. Make sure that it's going to work properly, because just injecting yourself with lots of insulin without supplementing with those minerals, you're not going to get efficient use of that insulin, and this is where the complications occur. This is so simple, it's scary. And so if you supplement properly, you avoid the intake of carbohydrates. And remember, there is no nutritional requirement for carbohydrates. Some people say to me, well, I can't live without them. I crave them. I just dream about them. That's all I want to think about is carbohydrates. How can you give up carbohydrates? Well, without supplementation, it's impossible. So I'll go along with that. Without supplementation, giving up carbohydrates is an impossible feat. Nobody is strong-willed enough to do it. Okay? Nobody could do it. Even King Kong couldn't do it. However, when you supplement with the minerals, the cravings, the munchies, the binge-eating behaviors, the pike of the cribbing go away. And when they go away, it's very, very simple. And again, as a diabetic, you do not want to eat carbohydrates. You can eat after 7 p.m., but you do not want to eat any carbohydrates after 7 p.m. Zero. If you need a snack, you can eat a handful of mixed salted nuts. You could have one of these zero-sugar protein shakes. You can throw an egg in there if you want to. You can have plenty of animal protein after 7 o'clock if you're a diabetic. And you're going to lose that fat. A lot of people actually will gain an enormous amount of weight when they're diabetic. But it's not due to genetics, and it's something that you can actually fix. Doctors get a lot of incorrect advice when they say, well, cut out the fats and eat more carbos when you're diabetic. Eat the low glycemic carbohydrates. Well, that's not correct. You want to eat lots more protein. You want to eat meals that are maybe 3 hours apart, maybe 4 or 5 meals a day instead of 3. But after 7 p.m., be sure no sugar, no juices, no fruit, no carbohydrates. You can eat a handful of mixed salted nuts. You can have a protein drink, either a whey protein drink, throw an egg in there, or you can have a hard-boiled egg with some salt and pepper on it. Eat a no-sugar sports drink. A lot of stuff you can do as a diabetic, but you got to stay away from that sugar, stay away from the carbohydrates, supplement properly, and you will be amazed at how good you're going to feel. Your energy is going to be up all day. You're not going to have the diabetic rantings and ravings, and a lot of people, they have such difficulty in managing their blood sugar that they do. They get anxiety attacks, panic attacks. They go into rages, and people, oh, that's just his diabetes acting up. You can eliminate all that. You can eliminate the need for amputations of toes, feet, and legs by supplementing properly and avoiding the sugar and avoiding the carbohydrates, eating more high-protein meals. It's not genetic. There's never been a genetic form of adult-onset type 2 diabetes. There's never, ever been a genetic form of juvenile-onset type 1 diabetes, although doctors will tell you that because that excuses them from having to fix you. If it's your bad genes, that excludes them from having to fix you. Well, diabetes is much more easily managed than doctors would have you believe. It's much more easily managed than doctors would have you believe. And we as individuals have to take control of managing diseases like diabetes, because if we're waiting for doctors to do it, it's not going to happen. Their level of care for diabetes is always driven by income. And again, they're not going to just take $30 and give you a 15-minute nutritional counseling. And so you have to educate yourself. Education is power, and education with action is superpower. And I get excited for type 2 diabetics because it's a disease we can eliminate. I'll repeat that. We can eliminate type 2 diabetes in America and all the other industrialized nations if we supplement properly and we eliminate the majority of the carbohydrates and sugars out of our diets. It's really quite a simple thing. Once you know what to do, it's actually quite simple. And so it's a matter of just doing it. Remember, education is power, and education with action is superpower. So cut the carbohydrates, eliminate the sugar, supplement properly, and guess what? It'll happen.